Hello and welcome. My name is Grace Riley, and today I am joined by Marcus Schroeder, who was arrested while he was reading scripture outside of a so-called family-friendly drag event in Wisconsin this past weekend. Marcus, thank you so much for joining me.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to have you. So just to start, it's my understanding that you attended this event with your church group. Can you just break down what happened, how you ended up there, what your goal was, and what the result ended up being?
Yeah, we go to quite a few events like this, and our goal was just to be a public witness against the drag queens and what they were doing with the children. A lot of these events, I've been going to these for 2 or 3 years now, and it really used to be like drag queen story hours is what they're advertised as. That's what it used to be. More and more lately, it's become really drag queen dance hours. They'll have like a short story time, but most of it is actually the drag queens dancing in front of the children. So I'm not even sure why they call it story hour anymore. But yeah, so we showed up at this protest in Watertown. There are probably between 150 to 200 protesters outside of the event. We were there from pretty much all day. The event was from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and it was around 3 o'clock, I think, in the afternoon that I was arrested. What I did was I just brought out one of the speakers that we had on the public sidewalk. The drag queen story hour had a fenced-in area that they had gotten a permit for. So I was outside of the fence, outside of their permitted area on a public sidewalk with the speaker, and I started reading from Galatians 5, which is it's not even a passage that talks about homosexuality or anything like that. It might later in the passage, but I hadn't gotten to that. But it was, just talking about love. True love fulfills the law. Through love, serve one another. Just talking about true love, because they'll throw that word around a lot. So I wanted to read a Bible passage about that talks about love. And in fact, the video that's gone viral online, the very beginning of that was the beginning of me reading the Bible on the amplification. So that was the beginning of me turning on the speaker. So you see in the video that short period of time, it was the moment I turned on the speaker, the moment I start reading, all these officers start coming around me, and one of them just walks up and starts ripping the microphone from my hand. And then another one grabs my arm from behind a few moments later and handcuffs me, and they arrest me, and they detain me for about an hour or two, booked me and get my mugshot, and then let me go with two citations, one for amplification without a permit, and then the second one for resisting arrest.
I think what's so interesting about it, and a lot of people have kind of pointed this out with the viral video, is that you guys were clearly there peacefully and you were reading a passage about biblical love, which isn't even something that would have been triggering, but this was the response that you got. And you noted in interviews, I think before you noted in your speech that you were not really warned, correct? That this kind of just happened.
No, yeah, there was no warning. The one thing that people have questioned is in the video, the officer is like, well, this was the same speaker as before. So, it seems to imply like we had been warned before. What he was referring to, there was no warning before. What he was referring to was earlier that day, like probably 2 or 3 hours earlier, one of our guys was walking inside their fenced in area with the speaker. He didn't have it on, he wasn't using it, but he was just walking in there inside the fence with the speaker. And so one of the officers came up and said, hey, they have a permit for this area. You can't have the speaker in this area. You have to take it outside the fence. And that's all we were told. So he took it outside the fence. And then a few hours later, I started using the speaker outside of the fence, outside of their permitted area. So when he mentioned that that was the speaker that they had talked about before, that was all that they had told us, was we couldn't have it inside the fence, which is why Jason Storms, the one who took that video, mentioned to them, he says, you guys said we could speak out here, because referring to outside the fence. And they said, yeah, but no amplification. But nobody had told us that. There had been no warning before that. Even when there was, when the amplification had been referenced to, all we were told was take it outside the fence, which is what we did.
Well, and it seems like with that, it could have been handled a lot differently than the kind of aggressive way that all of a sudden it escalated and you were handcuffed, which I'm sure you weren't expecting.
No, not at all. I mean, a lot of those officers, I'd probably say 4 to 5 of them that day were very hostile to our group. I think you could pretty clearly tell that they had their own personal bias. The rest of the officers, from what I heard, they had about 70% of the city's uh, police force there that day. So there were dozens of officers, and it was really 4 to 5 that were quite hostile towards us. So I wasn't expecting to get arrested at all. But as soon as I saw those officers coming towards me, I figured that there was going to be some sort of trouble that they were going to try and catch us for, even though we weren't doing anything wrong.
Yeah, and it is really interesting too. A lot of people have pointed out on Twitter even, and it's true that back during the riots that went on in 2020 and throughout many other protests that are led by the left, and also, I mean, even just at these events, all throughout Pride Month, there were cases of public nudity and all sorts of things that did not get the same response that you did for standing and reading scripture peacefully outside of the event. It's not even like you were in the middle of the event. So that's pretty crazy. But just to move on from that, what is your advice for Christians in approaching this issue and maybe other issues related?
Yeah, I think it's important for Christians to stand for truth, specifically in this area. We've been kind of told over and over repeatedly by our culture that we need to be silent on this issue, that to speak against this is to be unloving. But if we talk to these people, it's important just to define our terms. What is love? Read scripture. Romans 12 says, "Let love be without hypocrisy. Hate what is evil. Cling to what is good." First Corinthians 13, the passage about love says, "Love does not rejoice in evil, but rejoices in the truth." So it is not unloving to tell the truth about these issues. That is the loving thing to do. What is unloving is to stand idly by to watch these children's minds be perverted and indoctrinated by sexually perverted people, really, and for them to be raised in this culture and for us to do nothing about it to protect them. That's what's unloving. And the left, the LGBTQ movement has, told us anytime we want to speak up that we are essentially violating the separation of church and state. Constitution establishes the separation of church and state, which to them essentially means that you have to shut up and we can speak. And simply because you're Christian, you can't talk because you have religion. And since we're supposedly religiously neutral, therefore we get to talk and you don't. Which of course is not anywhere in the Constitution. Separation of church and state isn't in the Constitution at all. Separation of church and state is something that we need institutionally, like the church shouldn't run the state and vice versa. But I don't believe it's possible to have a separation of God and state. There's always going to be some ultimate authority that defines our morality as a culture that our laws are going to be based off of. And so as Christians, we are the ones who have the only worldview that's capable of giving a coherent basis for what is right, for what is wrong, for human rights, for why we should treat people with dignity and respect, and why people have these rights. And so if we're not going to speak up on these issues, then nobody is. A quote that I like to share is from a Christian, Sophie Scholl. She was in Nazi Germany. She started resistance in Nazi Germany and was beheaded at 21 for doing so. And she said, I believe her last words were, "How can we expect righteousness to prevail when there's hardly anyone willing to give themselves up for a righteous cause?" And so we can't be surprised when drag queen story hours and drag queen dance hours really are being done in front of our children, when for decades we've kind of given up on the culture and hid our light under a bushel and hid inside of the four walls of our church buildings. So practical advice, I would just say, it's quite easy. Just, I mean, 2 years ago, these were a lot more rare, but now I can almost guarantee that almost everybody has some sort of pride event or drag queen story event or something happening in their area, probably even in their town, their city. And so, just look this up online, go and go out there and be a public witness against this, have conversations with people and share the gospel with people. Take that light out of the bushel and put it in the darkest area in the culture.
Yeah, that's so well said. And there is such importance in sharing the truth and love, which is what you were doing. And really, I think, as you said, to Christians, this is really inspiring, just in the courage that it takes to be able to stand up and try to share the truth with people, even though it's going to be difficult. And I think it's something that people can take into their own lives as well. Whatever it may be, there's plenty of instances where, whether it's in someone's personal life, in their community, there are ways that they can share the gospel, and how can people stay up to date with the case and everything that you are doing?
Yeah, we've got a YouTube channel that we'll be posting videos about the case on, and that's Warriors for Christ Studios. And so if you just look that up, the first video should be, my arrest that you'll see. And then we also have a podcast that we started recording. Our first episode should be dropping this week and then next week. And so that should be on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It's just the Warriors for Christ podcast. So
Thank you so much for joining me. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for having the courage to speak out and to stand up.
yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.